So, done with chapter 1, moving on to chapter 2. 2.1 is our first section. It's all about segment bisectors. Bisector is a word that's new. Segment is not new. But once you find out about a bisector, we'll learn about angle bisectors as well. So it is a pretty important vocabulary term that I would definitely commit to memory. So the word bisect, we already talked about it. We're on the last slide. Bisector is going to be a really important term. So is bisect, same idea. To bisect is to divide into two congruent parts. So if I say bisect the segment, you're going to cut it into two equal parts. If I say bisect an angle, you're going to cut it into two congruent angles. Okay? So bisect is just the act or the verb of cutting something into two congruent parts or dividing it into two congruent parts. An angle bisector is actually what is causing the segment to now have two congruent sides. So you can bisect a segment using another segment, a ray, a line, or a plane that intersects a segment at its midpoint. And midpoint is that point that's right in the middle of the two equal parts. Okay, so when you're right in the middle of the segment, that point is called the mid segment. It's like in the middle of the segment. If you're looking at it ordered pairs on a graph, a segment that's on a coordinate plane, you can take the average of the x's, that'll put you right in the middle of the x's, and the average of the y's, that'll put you right in the middle of the y's. Okay, so there's the formula. To find an average of 2 points, you just add them, divide by 2. So we do that with the x's, add the y's, divide it by 2, and your answer is an ordered pair as well. And we'll go through a few examples, but definitely make sure you have that formula in your notes. Right, we're trying to go right in the middle. Yep, the average of the two. Exactly. So yeah, you can just put number 1 and then draw the diagram. Number 2 and then draw the diagram. Now, instead of writing out what we're asking you to find, we'll just write off to the side that we're looking for FK equals KG equals. Down here we're looking for ML equals and JL equals. All right, make sure when you're drawing this that you indicate that 20 is the length of the entire segment. So that's what this thing is right here. That's very important. Okay, the whole thing is 20. Now, a midpoint divides our segment into two congruent sides. To show something is congruent, we learned this last week, you can mark them in the same way. So as you're drawing it, let's go ahead and mark those segments in the same way. So if you use one mark on one side, use one mark on the other. Down here, I'll use 2 marks and 2 marks. That shows that those values are equal. They're the same. They're congruent. All right, so looking at number 1, the whole segment, FG, is 20 units long. And K divides the segment into two congruent parts. So how long would each of those parts need to be? If they're the same and all together, you would get 20. Exactly, 10.
Or 18 and 2.
They have to be equal. 18 and 2 would not be equal. But yes, there are a lot of combinations, 2 numbers that add to 20, but we just have to make sure they're the same. If you're like, how are they doing that? It's divided into two congruent parts. That's the definition of division. You're dividing a number into that many groups. So if you need to actually do that on a calculator, you just take the big number, divide by 2. That'll give you the length of each of the smaller segments. Depends which one you're doing, but yes. So if this side is 7, JM, and I'm telling you they're the same because M's right in the middle, How long is this one? Also 7. So for that one, you don't really have to do any math. And then for the whole thing, yes, you could multiply 7 by 2, or you could add 7 and 7. Same idea. Either way, what do you get? 14. Good. What are your questions so far? So for number 3, it says the line S is a segment bisector. What does a segment bisector do? Cuts it right in half. Very good. We want to find the value of x. So if this guy is cutting it right in half, what do I know about this expression and this expression? They're even. What do you mean even?
Like they're both the same.
The same. In algebra class, what do we call two things that are the same? Equal. So we're going to make these two equal. This is the part I want you to write with me. We've just written an equation. I spent a whole 2 years in algebra class learning how to solve these. You did not. Yep, divide both sides by 2, and what do you get for x? 4. Perfect. This is where I always pause and say, does this make any sense? If I put a 4 in for this x, and I said 2 times 4 is 8, are these really the same? Yeah, so you're good. If you plug it back in and you get like 16 and 8, you know that you've made some sort of mistake. They should be equal when you plug it back in. What are your questions? So if line A is the segment bisector of segment AB, find the value of x. So again, just take a minute. This should not take long. It's not a super challenging equation. Once you find the value of x, plug it back in and see if it makes sense. Mm-hmm. All right, does anyone have an equation that they wrote that they think is on the right track?
I do, but I'm not sure.
What's the equation you wrote? X plus 7 equals 9. That is absolutely correct. If that's our midpoint, because we have a segment bisector, that means that this side and this side are congruent. Congruent means equal. So I can put this expression equal to this expression and solve for x. How would I solve for the x? Subtract the 7 from both sides, and if you want to draw on your line of equality, that would be great. X equals 2. But before I move on, I'm going to put a 2 right in here for the x, and I'm going to see if that makes any sense at all. 2 plus 7 is the same thing as 9. Does that make sense? It does, so I can feel pretty confident when I move on. What are your questions? Okay, so once you have these written down, I want you to look back at your notes in the vocab section, and we have a formula for how to find midpoint. Does anyone remember what it is? x1 plus x2 divided by 2, comma, y's. The x's go first, then the y's. Good. All right, now, as you're writing the ordered pairs, I want you to label the points. The 4 is the first x value, that's x1. The 0 is the first y value, that's y1. Second x value, second y value. Now, all I'm doing is plugging those in. Honestly, I think the formula makes it trickier than it needs to be. Like I said earlier, we are finding the average of the first 2, then we're finding the average of the second 2. So if you want to label them, write the formula, take the x1 out, put the x value in, take the x2 out, put the x value in, go for it. I think it's easier to just think like, okay, the first number in each set of parentheses, those go together. The second number in each parentheses, those go together. Then I divide them both by 2 because I'm finding the average. Now, 4 plus 3 is kind of like 4 plus a negative 3 is kind of like 4 minus 3. What's 4 minus 3? 1. And then when you divide that by 1, you just get a half, or 0.5 would be acceptable. What's 0 plus negative 1? Negative 1, and negative 1 divided by 2 is just negative 1/2, or negative 0.5 would be fine as well. That's the midpoint. You have to write all that, yeah. Now, when you're done writing all of that, I want you to take a second and see if you can do B on your own. Because I don't think watching me do all these prepares you too much for the homework. So give it a shot. If you mess up, we'll catch your mistake in a second. Just give it a try. Does anyone know how to start part B? Okay, which numbers are my x's? Let's start there.
Negative 2 and 4.
Negative 2 and 4. The ones that come first are the x's. Those have to go together. And I'm finding the average of two numbers, so I'm going to divide by 2. Okay. Then I'm going to do the same thing for the y's. But which ones are the y's? 3 and negative 8. Now, to make it a little more challenging, we're adding positive and negative numbers. When one's positive and one's negative, it's more like subtracting. So what is 4 minus 2? 2. So now I have 2 divided by 2 in the front. And in the back, it's sort of like 3. It's sort of like 8 minus 3, but you have more negatives, so my answer is going to be negative? Negative 5. Good. Okay, what is 2 divided by 2? 1. Now, you have some options in the back. Personally, I would leave it like this.
1 comma?
No, I mean, I would leave it like that. If you type it into the calculator, it'll say 2.5, negative 2.5. I'm okay with that too. I'm okay with negative 2 and 1/2. However, whatever form you give it, if it's the correct value, I'm okay with it. I would leave it improper because that's just sort of what I do.
You like improper fraction?
An improper fraction, a top-heavy fraction. But the calculator doesn't do it like that. So it sort of depends how dependent you are on the calculator.
I don't think Mr. Betts like
Mr. Betts did not like improper fractions?
Yeah, he wants it like even. He's like, tell me I'm wrong.
I don't know. Usually, so this is all on YouTube. Hope he doesn't follow the channel. So yes, improper fractions are the preferred method, but mixed numbers or decimals are fine for this class. Any questions? Okay. There were some summaries missing last time, so make sure that this is something you're doing with us every day. You only need to write this sentence. Today, I learned. What'd you learn?
Improper fraction.
We did not.
We learned that.
I have no idea what Ruby's did.
We learned about
Math.
segment and
Segment what?
midpoint.
Segment bisectors
Yeah, that one. And we learned about midpoint.
and midpoints. Good. Perfect. So real quick, a few different ways you could see this on a test. And this is not the part you need to write down, but it's always nice to talk about. There will probably be a vocabulary matching section on Friday because we just did 3 new vocabulary words. So you need to make sure you're prepared to do those. You need to make sure you're prepared to find the midpoint when given two ordered pairs. And you need to be prepared to find the length of a segment given the fact that there's a segment bisector. So there's like 3 types of questions that you could see from today. Okay? Now, is there anything that you still have questions on before we get the homework going? Okie dokie.